I didn't know my telephone number. I didn't know my address, and I didn't know my PIN numbers or stuff like that. So I had to relearn all that. That was. I had everything written on a piece of paper.
Hi, and welcome everybody, and we hope you enjoy this podcast called On the Tip of My Tongue. Now, I'm Rob Edwards.
And I'm Jonathan Hirons.
And this podcast is a follow-up to a film which Jonathan made about aphasia. So, what is aphasia? Well, it's a condition caused by some kind of injury to the brain, which is often, could be a stroke, or could be just falling off a bike. And it affects your ability to use language in all its forms. Speaking, writing, reading, sending text, whatever. 350,000 people in the UK suffer from a debilitating condition called aphasia. Fewer than half this number suffer from Parkinson's, and yet most people have heard of Parkinson's, whilst almost nobody has heard of aphasia. Okay, Jonathan, so you were the director of the film On the Tip of My Tongue. So tell us a little bit about it.
On the Tip of My Tongue is a documentary about the condition of aphasia. It's what happened to me when I had a stroke 5 years ago, and it talks about other people who have aphasia as well. If you want to watch the film, it's on tipofmytonguefilm.com, and it's on Vimeo and YouTube.
Why don't we just talk a little bit about you and what happened to you when you had this stroke? You know, what that was like, and kind of how it developed, and what happened to your language abilities.
I was working, and we'd had a break, and I came back to the group I was working with, and somebody said, "Can you change a word or a sentence on the document we were working on?"
Yeah. And
suddenly I couldn't do it. It just everything just disappeared. You know, I knew the words. They were in my head, but they didn't come out in any way, either on paper or on, to a certain extent, on my in my speech.
So when you looked at your laptop, am I right in thinking you would be what I imagine a dyslexic person would be? You just saw squiggles instead of letters. You saw kind of incomprehensible shapes.
It was more that I couldn't organise the letters in the right order to make a sentence or a word.
So you knew what the letters were.
Yes. But
you couldn't spell, basically. You suddenly lost the ability to spell.
Yeah, or to make any sense of what was in front of me.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So that then I obviously realised that something was wrong, and I was long story short, I was taken to hospital, and they did a CT scan and realised that I'd had a bleed on my brain.
Yeah.
And that obviously was, I now know that is what is known as the Broca's area, which affects people's language abilities.
You seem to speak pretty well to me now, but you couldn't immediately after the stroke. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it took probably about a year to get back to the sort of what I can do now. But to begin with, I couldn't read.
Yeah.
I couldn't write. I had to relearn writing to a certain extent. So when it first happened, if I tried to write something on it just didn't. It was like a child writing.
God.
And that came back fairly quickly. But the other thing is that although it's in my head, it's all there. So I've never lost the words in my head. It's when they come out of my mouth, I suppose, really. So it's the external part of it doesn't work. So it's very difficult to explain. And then sometimes it comes back. So it's not something it's constant. But it's the same with writing. I can write a sentence and quite quickly. And sometimes it will take me 5 minutes.
But so you can always... It hasn't affected your comprehension.
No.
So you can read quietly, silently to yourself.
I can.
You can read a novel and you don't have a problem with that.
No.
But if I asked you to read out loud...
I would struggle.
What are you hoping to achieve, both with the documentary film and now with this podcast?
I think the main thing is to raise awareness about the condition, the lack of funding around it.
Maybe hope to give some hope as well to sufferers and their carers, people.
Yeah, I think that's...
Give some kind of guidance and hope for them. Because you yourself, as a sufferer, yours is quite an inspiring story, I think.
Well, this is and I think the film does set out to do that, to get people to understand that it's not that there is hope after a stroke, and some people, and I get better to a certain extent. It never goes away, but you can control it.
There are different types of aphasia. They kind of overlap with one another.
Yes.
Should we just quickly fill in on that side?
Yes, because there are.
You mentioned Broca's.
Yes.
Just now, the Broca's area of the brain. So the Broca's that you mentioned is also known as a non-fluent aphasia, and you and people with Broca's, they have a partial loss of language ability. They have difficulty speaking fluently, and their speech may be limited to a few words at a time. So it might be described as halting or effortful. So as well as Broca's, there's also, which is described as a non-fluent aphasia, there's also another one called Wernicke's aphasia, which is a fluent aphasia. Now, this is weird to think about, really, because apparently people with Wernicke's aphasia can speak quite fluently. They speak perfect grammar. They make sentences. Their speech is not halting or effortful quite often, but they talk nonsense. So, I don't know. You don't have that.
Well, no.
Or do you? Because these things mixed up. They're not all completely like separate compartments. Do you have
That's
that?
right. It's not black and white. It's I do sometimes have a bit of touch of that.
Right.
And I can't reproduce it straightly, easily. But sometimes something will come out, and I'm thinking about one thing and saying completely different things come out my mouth.
And there's one more called anomic aphasia, which is something to do with not being able to find the right words for what you want to talk about. You have your grammar and your speech fairly fluently, but the key word that you want just doesn't seem to come.
Disappears, yeah.
And just disappears, often the name of something.
Yeah.
So you then have to sort of talk around it.
Yes.
Describe it.
That's right, yeah.
So you find yourself
But it's all about the brain, isn't it? It's all about how the brain is wired. And this is the thing that I'm trying to get over to people, is that it's not simple. It never is with the brain. And some people struggle a lot more than I do. I mean, I'm in a certain way, I'm fortunate because I'm at this level of being able to express myself. But some people sometimes don't speak at all, and have had the same problem. May have had the same bleed on the brain or whatever, but it's just hit them in a different way.
I mean, in your film, which is great, by the way, and I'll say this because you're too modest, it's won a few accolades, I think, from... Well, can you tell us?
Well, yes, I think within the community, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
I mean, we've worked quite hard to push the film out to the sort of professionals, as it were. So the speech and language therapy community are very on board with this.
And the Tavistock Trust, I think.
Yes. Are very supportive on this, and in fact we've talked to them about this actual podcast, and they're helping me do this as well.
So I think we've got to talk a little bit about your road back to recovery.
We realised that we had to try and get some speech therapy. It was going to be at least 6 weeks before I could get an appointment. Anne thought, well, because she'd been reading up about it, and the thing about anything like this is the first 2 or 3 months. Get the most your most improvement in the first 2 or 3 months.
This is after a stroke.
Anything like that. Yeah,
anything like that.
Yeah.
They read on the brain.
Get going.
Basically. Get going as quickly as possible.
That's right. Yeah. So Anne decided the best thing to do was to do some stuff at home. She got some flashcards for me to say, this is a cat, this is a whatever.
Well, these would be kids. These would be things used in a primary school.
That's exactly where she went. She went to the
local.
Yeah, yeah. And she got some flashcards, and we started doing that. So what's that cat? It's a dog. I obviously knew what they were, but I couldn't say the words.
You couldn't say the words. So you look at a picture of a cat and you go...
I know it's a cat, but I mean...
I mean, you know it is, but you say dog or gibberish or...
Yeah, or something, or nothing came out right, or at all. No, it wasn't. I wasn't silent, but I wouldn't say... It's more difficult. Say elephant.
Yeah.
That would be hard for me to say the word elephant. I'd trip over that sort of thing. Yeah. We tried to do some exercises with the reading side of things, and that's where she came up with Cider with Rosie. Wonderful book. And she said, just read some of that, and I could do maybe to begin with. I could do 2 lines.
Right.
And then 3 lines, and then 4 lines, and so on and so forth, until I could do a whole page. But, if I had to read, and I did this earlier, I read something off a website, from a website, and I was struggling, I stumbled over it, because I can't get the words out in the right order correctly, or not at all. I didn't know my telephone number, I didn't know my address, and I didn't know my PIN numbers, obviously, and stuff like that. So I had to relearn all that.
Right. But that's scary, isn't it? I mean,
I had everything written on a piece of paper. My address,
your name,
my name. Yeah, it's a confidence thing as well.
Right.
You've got to remember that you lose your confidence. Yeah. Whoever you are.
Yeah.
You think, oh God, what will happen if I? So there's this kind of fear for going too far away from home, because you might not find your way back. And numbers still elude me.
Right.
And constantly. I'm not the right person to ask what a number is, because I'll see the number, but I'll say another number. A great example, which always happens to me, if I say I'll see you in a week's time, I'll say I'll have already said a month, a year, or something before I get round to a week.
And you say the month, a year out loud, or you say it in your head before you get...
out loud.
Right.
It's in my head, it's a week.
It's a week, yeah. As you say, you can make quite rapid progress in the first few weeks.
Yes,
is that right?
It's a thing. Yeah, it's a.
But then it sort of plateaus out.
Exactly.
You kind of reach a level, and then it's much harder to get back to the full.
Yeah.
Whatever.
And some people do better than others, I think.
Yeah.
And some people never even get over the 3 months or whatever it is.
Now, so after 6 weeks, you got your therapy going, the official, this is NHS therapy. How was that? Can we talk about that?
Very good.
Yeah.
Obviously, they know what they're dealing with because they get my notes, so they knew what I was deficient of.
So you can get therapy on the NHS?
Oh, yes.
Of course you can.
Of course you can, yes.
Yeah.
But it's very short-lived. I think I had 6 weeks.
Right.
I think I might have 2 sessions of 3 weeks, 6 weeks, or something like that. But it's short.
Is that like once a week?
It's once a week.
Or once a day?
Once a week. And they'll give you homework.
Right.
So they get you to do drills, 20 words.
Right.
And you have to tell them what they are. And sometimes you wouldn't get them right. You get half of them right.
And your confidence level, that's recovered quite a bit, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I still don't. Yeah, most of it.
You travel around on your own.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't have done that.
And you drive again, don't you?
I drive, yeah. I had to stop driving. Well, that was a combination of my license ran out and they wouldn't give me my license back because I had to have certain tests, eye tests. But it took 6 months plus to get my license back. And then there's the confidence of actually going back to driving.
Yeah.
So it took longer than...
And how about your social confidence,
It's a slow process to get back to where you were, obviously. I mean, it took a year to get really more back to my sort of normal self, if you want to call it. In those terms I'm talking about, socially.
I think perhaps we should talk a little bit about when you were making the film and you met, obviously, I mean, I don't know whether you met them because you were making it, but these are people you'd met anyway, who's fellow sufferers, as it were.
Yes, I used them as the...
But you knew them from
Barbara's group.
Barbara's group, yeah. We have said it before, I think, but it's very, very varied. If there are people in your film who are really struggling.
Yeah. I couldn't do it. For physically could not do half of what I've done.
Yeah.
As I say.
Thinking of Dan and Emily, who's young.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to say this isn't we are oldish people, well, we're in our 70s. There are young people, Dan and Emily.
Plenty of young people
who have strokes, and Dan was in a road accident.
Yeah.
Hit his head. It might be a good idea just for a second or two to talk about people's perceptions of victims of stroke and people with aphasia, how other people perceive them. And I've heard this, not so much from you, but there can really be, and I suppose it's obvious really, if someone whose speech is very badly affected, probably more so than yours, that can be interpreted by other people as some kind of lack of intelligence or impairment, shall we say, of their full intellectual faculties.
Yeah, I think that's true. And
I don't know whether any of that has ever happened to you in terms of people perceiving you or reacting to you. If they don't know you and they've
I think there is a possibility that would happen to me. An example, one of the things that you can't do, and even at my level, which is the higher level, should we say, is that you can't quickly respond to, say, a bit of banter.
Right, witty remarks. Because you're a very witty person.
Yeah.
You've always been a very...
I try.
You try.
But I find that very difficult to keep that going because I can't get the words out quick enough.
Right.
So I may have come up with something witty, maybe. But it's gone. It's too late because you could miss this whiz past.
Missed the moment.
You missed the moment.
It's all timing.
It's all timing. So particularly in a group situation, you kind of get lost
because you do. I know you're a very sociable person, and I know you play football, don't you?
I do.
And you've gone back to you've gone back to that, as it were.
Yeah.
Since the stroke.
Since the stroke. I don't know, even the spoke, but the stroke was worse. The spoke, well, I could live with.
Yes.
But the stroke, no.
Yes, the spoke less. Yeah. So you play football. So the team, obviously, football. Banter. God.
All the time.
It's
constant.
Why else do we do it? Kick a ball around and banter.
Exactly. So this is where I sometimes get left behind.
Yeah.
In the discussions, one-on-one, it's not a problem, but when you're in a group, it's more difficult.
Yeah.
And I think, and picking up your point about people thinking you're not intelligent, you've lost some intelligence. Obviously, it's not the case. You've not lost anything at all. It's not a dementia type situation where your faculties have dropped.
Yeah, your memory hasn't gone.
No. Everything's
sense
there.
Of the world.
Yeah,
what the hell?
Everything's there.
Yeah, everything's there.
It's just not coming out in the right way,
quick enough,
or at all, depending on how bad your aphasia is. So I think it's worth pointing that out.
Yes.
So we're not talking about people who've lost their intelligence.
Yes.
They've just lost the ability to respond to things that happen around them.
Thank you for listening to this On the Tip of My Tongue podcast. We hope you found it helpful and informative. Now, if you want more help and information about strokes and aphasia, please go to stroke.org.uk, say aphasia, that's SAY, aphasia, all one word, .org, or the aphasia page of nhs.uk. Okay, Jonathan, well, that was a lot of fun. So we're going to do it all again. What are we going to talk about next time?
Well, I thought next time we'll talk to Barbara Chalk.
Now, she is in your documentary. There's quite a lot of her on the screen there, and she's an absolutely inspiring and wonderful person to listen to.
Indeed, and she runs a group, a sort of drop-in group for people with aphasia. And she was a speech therapist, so she knows how all this works when people start with having aphasia. And we're going to talk to her in a bit more detail and give her thoughts on what it's going to be like for them. I would do that.
This has been a Buffalo Lounge production. Please follow Buffalo Lounge on all the socials.